John Adams. John Adams, again, interesting case. John Adams had an experience where he had a long correspondence with Thomas Jefferson. And, they had been enemies because they battled each other for the presidency. And Jefferson came out on top. And for a long time, they didn't talk to one another. But later in life, they kind of came around and they became friends again. And I'm trying to find a passage here where John Adams and Thomas Jefferson got into a situation. Here it is. Their private correspondence is amazing. They're both been retired from public life at this point. So they're talking very freely about religion. There's a series of letters they exchange back and forth about religion. Adams is writing later in his diary where a military officer had come to see him, Major Green. Major Green was apparently a pretty devout fellow. He fell into a conversation with me, wrote Adams, about the divinity and satisfaction of Jesus. And John Adams goes on to write that Major Green's arguments were that he really couldn't understand these things, the divinity of Jesus and how someone could be born of a virgin. He said that these things were outside the scope of our minds. This is the argument he made to John Adams. So John Adams concluded, thus, mystery is made a convenient cover for absurdity. So Adams is really saying there that he considered things like the virgin birth, the divinity of Jesus, the Trinity, to be absurd. I mean, you can look at it that way. He's saying that he doesn't think that that's a real powerful argument to say that, well, the human mind can't comprehend these things. It's beyond your understanding. And certainly that is an argument that a lot of times religious people make. It's kind of, the non-falsifiable hypothesis, to argue that there are certain things you can't understand, so don't even bother to try. Well, Adams found that to be a rather unsatisfactory answer. Adams, again, was a church member. He was a believer. But the idea that he would have advocated for a church-state union while holding that elevated Christianity, while holding the views that the central doctrines of Christianity were not valid, would seem to be a little bit unusual. So Adams, again, probably not the kind of person that you would argue was a conventional Christian. It leaves us with Jefferson. Jefferson is a very interesting figure because Jefferson left a long track record of what he believed about religion. Washington, a little reluctant to get into it. Madison, whom I'll talk about in a minute, very reluctant. But Jefferson, no, not at all. Jefferson wrote voluminous amounts of correspondence to many people over many years. Some of his best letters on the subject of religion came when he was out of public life, living in retirement at Monticello, and felt that he could speak more freely. One of his most remarkable letters is to John Adams, April 11, 1823. They're writing to each other about lots of things. John Calvin. Jefferson did not like John Calvin. He's talking about John Calvin being an advocate of demonism. Jefferson tended to use lurid rhetoric from time to time. He said that Calvin worshipped a demon, a malignant spirit. Then he goes on to say that the doctrines that Calvin promoted, which were sort of conventional, very conservative Christianity, could not stand the test of rational thought. Here's what Jefferson writes. The day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus by the Supreme Being as his father in the womb of a virgin will be classified with the fable of the generation of Minerva in the brain of Jupiter. Can you imagine a politician today saying or writing something like that, saying that the virgin birth is similar to the story of Minerva springing out of the brain of Jupiter and having any kind of political career? Now again, to be fair, Jefferson wrote this when he was in private life. He was retired. But nevertheless, that is what he said. What else did he say? Here's a very remarkable letter. October 31st, 1819. Jefferson's writing to a man named William Short. They've been talking about religion. Jefferson decides in this letter to list everything in conventional Christianity that he does not accept. This is what he does not accept. Let me read you the list. The Immaculate Conception of Jesus, his deification, the creation of the world by him, his miraculous powers, his resurrection and visible ascension, his corporeal presence in the Eucharist, the Trinity, original sin, atonement, regeneration, election, orders of hierarchy, etc. I've always been fascinated by the etc. What's left? That's what he doesn't believe. Now, we could, I guess, come to the conclusion that Jefferson, even though he did not believe in the divinity of Jesus, even though he did not believe in the Trinity, did not believe in the virgin birth, still thought that it was a good idea to establish some form of conservative Christianity in the Constitution. But it seems to be a stretch of the imagination. Let me read you one other passage from Jefferson. It kind of gives you his religious thinking. This is a letter to Benjamin Waterhouse, June 26, 1822. Had the doctrines of Jesus been preached always impure as they came from his lips, the whole civilized world would now be Christian. I rejoice that in this blessed country of free inquiry and belief, which has surrendered its creed and conscience to neither kings nor priests, the genuine doctrine of the only one God is reviving. And I trust that there is not a young man now living in the United States who will not die a Unitarian. Okay, bad prediction. But my point is, Jefferson thought that a sort of generalized, rationalized religion, a form of deistic Unitarianism, would become the generalized religion of the United States. He greatly admired the doctrines of Jesus because he believed they were quite different than what the conservative pastors of the day were preaching. And I imagine it was very sad to Jefferson near the end of his life to see not only was a rational form of deism not taking hold, but a very aggressive form of evangelicalism in the form of the Great Awakening was taking hold. And that people were doing things like having ecstatic religious experiences in churches and prophecy and words of God and the kind of thing that are common today in Pentecostal religions. Madison, I'll just say a few words about. Madison, again, not much known about his religion, didn't say much about it publicly, was a member officially of the Anglican Church, but his leading biographers, Ralph Ketchum, considers him a deist. Madison was clearly not an advocate of church-state union, having drafted the Memorial and Remonstrance, having written the First Amendment, drafted the Bill of Rights, father of the Constitution. As president, was so strict on the separation of church and state that he vetoed a bill that would have given a church in Washington, D.C. a symbolic charter to care for the poor. No public money, nothing like that, just a symbolic charter. He said that went too far, violated the First Amendment. Madison issued days for proclamation and prayer during the War of 1812 because he felt they would boost public morale. Later in his life, wrote an essay in which he regretted having done that, concluded that his own actions had violated the First Amendment. So I don't think we can say that Madison was an advocate of church-state union or particularly fundamentalist in his approach either.